Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Leaving a Legacy and Breaking Down Cultural Safety with Cathy Almost and Cherie Mercer. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, and we'd like to thank our First Nations Health Authority for generously funding this learning circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the nation you're calling in from in the chat box below. Today's learning circle will be exploring leaving a legacy and breaking down cultural safety with Cathy Almost and Cherie Mercer, and I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves in just a few moments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Serene Squawkin. I'm the UBC Learning Circle manager, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Joining us today, working behind the scenes, is Cynthia Learng, our production coordinator. She'll be working in the background and interacting with everyone in the chat. Finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll just provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. So please make sure that you are looking after yourself. And if at any point you feel you need to talk to a friend, elder, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Nohwe Na'en Jinjit Show Adili. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Cree. I am Gwich'in. I am part of the Northwest Territory Métis Association, and I'm also Scottish. My name is Cathy Almost. My father attended residential school, and my mother attended Indian day school. I'm located on the stolen land of the Gitxalat Sioux and Kitsin Kalim, people from the Tsimshian Nation, and this is part of the Highway of Tears, for those of you who are familiar with that area, also known as Terrace. I'm a person who believes in empowering others and helping them find their strengths and holding space. And I'll turn it over to Cherie.
Luam Scotty, I am Cherie Mercer. On my mother's side, I am a descendant of the Lequitak and the Wiwakai Nation of the Kwakwaka'wakw. And on my father's side, I am Niska. I'm speaking to you today on Nisga'a lands in the community of Gitlach-Damix. I focus on business technology as well as holding space for others. I'll hand it back to Cathy.
Thanks so much. So we just wanted to acknowledge today is the year anniversary of the horrific discovery of the bodies of the children in Tecumloops, Sequanic, in the Kamloops area. And we thought it would be really appropriate to take a moment of silence in respect and acknowledge for all the residential school survivors and for the thousands of bodies that have been found. So if you'll just join us in a moment of silence, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. So we invite you all to take a deep breath as we move forward with this talk. Cynthia, we're ready to begin with the slide. So we're going to talk today about just the organizations that we're part of. So I am part of the BC Patient Safety Quality Council, and I have been working in engagement since 2013. The BC Patient Safety Quality Council is an organization of around just over 45 people, and our goal is to accelerate quality faster than if we didn't exist. So we work with the Ministry of Health, and we work with the different health authorities and all kinds of health organizations across the province. And we also administer the Patient Voices Network. So today we're here to talk about, well, actually, I'll let Cherie talk about being a patient partner. Go ahead, Cherie.
Yes, thank you. If you haven't heard about Patient Voices Network, which we will refer to in this presentation as PVN, it's a community of patients, families, and caregivers. There's approximately 1,200 who volunteer, and this is an important work that brings the patient perspective and efforts to improve BC's healthcare system. I've been with PVN since 2010, and each volunteer completes an orientation session. And my orientation took place in Vancouver, and this was significant because in 2010, Vancouver was the place to be. I was the only Indigenous patient partner in the room. I participated sporadically in the beginning, the first few years, and over the years, I will share more about my experience and the great benefits of being an Indigenous patient partner with the Council. I'll hand it back to Cathy.
Thanks so much. So today we're here to talk about culturally safe engagements. We're hoping from this presentation that you'll hear the benefits that Cherie has found being a patient partner and giving her voice to healthcare. And we're also hoping that you're going to learn about a relational model of engagement that I've designed from my learnings and from the generous people who have helped me along the way. And lastly, we hope that cultural safety won't be so much of a mystery to you, that you'll be able to see and know when you are being culturally safe and know how to learn more about it. So we'll go to the slide 3, Cynthia. Since I've been working in the Patient Voices, working with the Council in the Patient Voices Network work since 2013, as I mentioned, and this is a place, the Patient Voices Network is a place if you're a healthcare partner and you want to engage voices, any patient voice, you're welcome to come to us and ask about how to do that and to get connected with the public. That's what our goal is. And part of that work I've been privileged to be part of is building the Indigenous perspective. When I started, we had around 5 Indigenous patient partners in 2013. And so now we have around 200. So we have been very successful in building relationships and getting to know Indigenous people. But at the beginning, we weren't as successful. We just wanted to take a moment to say why this presentation and document is so special. We're going to talk about a few documents. The documents that we're going to show you, we have a 2-pager and a companion guide. And these documents were created based on one point in time on June the 17th, 2021, where 13 patient partners got together, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and talked to each other in a relational model that I was able to design with the late Gitxsan hereditary chief, Bill Blackwater Jr., and the director of patient and public engagement, my supervisor, Tammy Hofer. They assisted in the creation of the meetings that we had to develop these documents. I facilitated pre-meetings and we designed the documents based on the learnings from the meeting on June 17th. Actions in the documents are based on my learnings since I began my engagement work in 2013. Cherie.
And these principles are broad strokes on culturally safe patient engagement. As healthcare providers, we ask that you do your homework about your local nation that surrounds you, where you work, live, and play, and dig in and start with awareness and understanding. Ask questions, go online and research, look at the nation's website. What Cathy is known for is picking up the phone and having direct outreach. This by far has proven to be the largest part of providing cultural safety. And Cathy has a great journey beginning in 2008 when a significant milestone. I'll ask her to share her experience.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cherie. So in 2008, I had an elder friend who was coming to visit me. She'd always wanted to go to the Nass Valley where Cherie lives, where the Nisga'a people are. And so we took a trip. I got 3 gift baskets and fruit baskets. And so I felt like I was ready. I had my PowerPoint and my elder friend. And so we went into the communities and I was like a bird flying overhead, cropping down information and flying away. I learned that later. I didn't know it at the time, but the people were very generous. I didn't call or make any appointments. I just showed up. And needless to say, the trip was not successful. People were very curious. Why are you looking for our personal information? Because of colonization, of course, which I again didn't realize, and my approach was totally the wrong way. After this, I spent time asking questions and learning from Cherie and others like Verna Howard, who is a Gitxsan engagement coordinator in Gitxkukla. And they taught me about how to approach a community in a good way, picking up the phone, as Cherie mentioned, and then I had actually started picking up my phone with Cherie, and Cherie and I got to know each other and we clicked. So we'll go to the next slide. I called you, Cherie, to tell you that I was going to go to the all-native basketball tournament. So tell me what you thought when I told you that.
And I felt very sorry for Cathy, as she didn't know that this was the largest basketball tournament that is significant for many nations, especially in the north. And I said, I'll meet you there, Cathy. And I really did feel sorry for her. We spent a couple of hours at our table. Nobody really stopped by. And she had a little gift card for a door prize, and that still didn't attract people. However, the very few people that we did see at our table, they eventually signed up, but a few years later. And I believe that Cathy really learned about outreach. And although it was a large gathering, we had a small number, which is still significant in the outreach, and patient partners were able to sign up and learn about Patient Voices Network.
Yeah, that's right. And the next slide. So this is how you started doing patient engagement, right? You had signed up in 2010, and then in 2014, I called Millie, a friend who I knew was in the area, and I thought maybe Cherie would want to work with Millie on something. And I said, "Hey, Cherie, have you seen the one that's talking about the emergency room?" And so you had a chance to work with Millie on that one. Tell us about that.
Yes, to design a poster to create for a healthcare facility in my area in northern BC was significant. Putting the poster together and designing it and having it in place today is something that I would not have been a part of, and it still is in place at the hospital today. I'm very thankful for this opportunity, and it was a nice smaller project compared to some of the larger ones that I was able to be part of.
Yeah, and tell us about patient engagement, Cherie. Now that you get it, not everybody understands exactly what patient engagement is.
Yes, so patient engagement is not a word that I used to use before, and even calling myself a volunteer is not a word that I would use. I'm speaking from lived experience and making healthcare to be an improved process, and that could take shape in a different variety of ways, whether it be journey mapping, creating a poster, or speaking to principals or oversight committees. It's very diverse, and it's not an opportunity that I get often, especially in my own community or in my own area in northern BC. So I'm very grateful for the what now is termed engagements for Indigenous patient partners. And most people do not understand, and it takes us, the Indigenous patient partners, a few months, even years, to understand what engagement actually is and what volunteering with Patient Voices Network can offer us.
Yeah, and you had a chance to, I was doing some process mapping with Northern Health, and they were looking for a patient. And so I knew that Cherie had children, and I thought, hey, they've probably gone to see the dentist. Maybe she would be a good voice for that. Tell us about your experience with the dental engagement, just a little bit if you want.
Yes, so I went to an engagement, and all the people in the room, the healthcare professionals in the room, they had this huge map on the wall of how they offer pediatric surgery. And one of the healthcare partners, he said, I want to hear from the parent in the room. What on this map is the most important? And I said, their very first step, getting my child the appointment, and the very last step is taking my child back from the surgery. Nothing in between, because there's so many steps in the middle that the standards are already there. And I told them that from an experience, many experiences of pediatric dental surgery, that what I thought, and they've listened to me very carefully, and we were able to change a system in northern BC. The wait times got shorter. The respect for parents was there focusing on the very first step and the very last step. And this is what engagement actually does. And there's many more benefits that came out of this, especially for communities in the North, Indigenous communities in the North.
Yeah, and I remember when the College of Physicians and Surgeons came to us and said, "Hey, we're looking for some Indigenous voices. Do you have any?" And so I made a few calls around to just get some people interested. And Cherie was one of the ones who got to go to this engagement of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And I'll just summarize it if that's okay, Cherie. This group that came from the Patient Voices Network made a profound impact on the direction of the cultural safety standard. That's what the facilitator said afterwards, and how they were just raving about how they didn't understand what the Indigenous experience was like at point of care. And these patients were able to share their point of care experiences so that in a way that helped the College of Physicians and Surgeons go in a different direction with their own cultural safety standards, and made a profound impact are the words that he used. So that was fantastic. We'll go to the next slide. So back in my journey about learning about patient engagement and going to health fairs and meeting different people, here's some more pictures of patient engagements and different opportunities people have had to speak, do public speaking, as well as attend document reviews. The past 2 years, despite a lot of challenges, we've been successful in continuing our engagement work and doing it online and doing it in a culturally safe way. There's been an awesome commitment from the organization, the council, through Christina Kraus and Tammy Hofer, to focus on Indigenous cultural safety. And so I really appreciate them. So yeah, this is just a picture of that. And then go ahead, Cherie, did you want to talk about Sequoia, or do you want me to? I will?
Yes,
okay.
And Cathy will share the significant learnings that she learned from Sequoia, our knowledge keeper at the council.
Yeah, so she's pictured there on the bottom right. She went to the emergency room with her grandson, and she told us a quick story. She said she wasn't being treated very well. And so she looked at the nurse and she said, I'm just trying to get some culturally safe care here. So if you're an Indigenous person who's on this call, please consider using these words. Because when she said she's trying to get culturally safe care, she saw the nurse, her eyes got all big, and then she realized that she wasn't giving culturally safe care. And so you may need to use these words if you are in an unkind situation. And anyone can use these words to help improve a situation. So we'll go to slide 7. So as you all know, COVID hit in 2020, and we were doing learnings, and you can see this document here. Cynthia's going to put the link in the box for culturally safe mindfulness during a pandemic. This is a document that's developed by UBC and helped inform some of our learnings. And Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, the discovery of the horrific discovery of the children from the Kamloops, Suquamish, and across the province happened. COVID, it was a tough year, 2020, but we were able to do some work, and In Plain Sight also came out. So we'll go to the next slide. Go ahead, Cherie.
Yes, and we recognize that many people aren't sure when they are not being culturally safe. So a definition is important to understand from a lived experience. And I'm very young. I've experienced my fair share of unsafe cultural health care in this province. And through generations, we've experienced this, my grandparents, my parents, as well as myself, my spouse, and our 2 children, my little household. And although the life experiences of unsafe healthcare that I can share, these are really hard discussions, from simply contemplating picking up the phone to call the after hours care line, or simply picking up the phone for a regular checkup for my children. I still hesitate today to make the call when my family is in need of healthcare, whether it be something simple or something far worse, to an emergency medical situation. And I know for any given experience in healthcare, at least for the next little while, I know that I will most likely encounter unsafe healthcare at some point in the ordeal. This is why self-determination is profound for my family and I, my little household, to know our rights as patients and to be able to be a part of a network where these principles that we will share with you are shaping a better healthcare systems through engagement. I've shared some of my personal experiences that are mine and some hope for improved healthcare in this province. And those are mine to share and own, and each person has their own experiences. And I just like, because I shared some personal experiences, they're profound. For me to not be able to pick up the phone and dial 911 without hesitating first. I should be able to be at a point where I can just pick up the phone and simply make the call, make the appointment. And I'd like to invite you to take a cleansing breath with me. And this is what we can all do in the moment. It's a step, an action step forward to culturally safe care. Thank you. Over to you, Cathy.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Cherie. You're not the only Indigenous patient who has talked about the culturally unsafe care that they've received in their experiences. So can you tell us a little bit about what does it look like to receive culturally unsafe care as a patient? What have you experienced?
Yeah, just from picking up the phone, my son was in pain and I asked him, can you wait 15 minutes so that we actually know it's an emergency? And this was after hours. Proceeded from there. He was not met by a doctor for quite a lengthy amount of time and remained in pain for quite some time before he received some medications to help with that. And then they told me I had to drive him 300 kilometers away to the nearest surgeon by myself in a vehicle due to COVID, that he would only be allowed one parent. And I had to leave and go get my vehicle ready to transport him. And then as I left for 5 to 10 minutes, I came back and he was administered more medications against my knowledge and consent. He needed the medication. So by the time we got to the next facility, which was 300 kilometers away, where the surgeon was, we were met and we were able to have him in a wheelchair because he couldn't walk. That's how much in pain he was. And then we were okay in the waiting area. And then we were met with some abruptness by a nurse who claimed that my son didn't know his own name. This was his first time in the emergency room. He didn't know his name would be called and he couldn't make it to 10 feet away from him where she was. I tried to push him towards the nurse to say, here he is. And she proceeded to say he doesn't even know his own name. The wheelchair cannot come in here and he has to walk. And she was just going based off of his age. He could not even really hold up his own head. And he was out of it by the amount of medication that he had. So I said, not today. I'm pushing this wheelchair in, whether it can get in there or not. And he can sit in the chair once I get him there. And I didn't have a response when she said he doesn't even know his own name. Clearly, he did know his own name. And however, we were met after we got through the doors in the ER and after she took his vitals. She wasn't very nice. Then we finally got into the bed, and that was my only step. Through the door, park the vehicle, go back in to see him, get in bed number one. And then we were set up in the bed there. And then finally the surgeon came and he was very nice. He provided culturally safe care. He also said, we've been expecting you. You must have drove here very fast. We didn't expect you for another half hour, 45 minutes. And all I cared about was getting my son to surgery, emergency surgery. And I didn't expect to receive culturally unsafe care, especially by just somebody saying he doesn't even know his own name. We wouldn't have been there. We wouldn't have drove 300 kilometers if we knew that we would be greeted by that. And to be able to talk about it though, a few years later, a year later, I know that things can change, they can get better. We shouldn't have experienced that. And he did get his surgery. He recovered very well. After that encounter, we were treated like any other patient would be in this province. And that's what I mean when, you know, at some point I'll encounter it for the next little while, and just being aware of my rights and my children's rights as a patient, and being able to speak up for myself, and making the call to know that I can get care in this province, no matter if it's in the north or somewhere else in the province. I've gone to BC Children's Hospital where I've been provided every time that I have gone there with a substantial amount of culturally safe care. And I can't say enough about encountering it and self-determination to get my son in and out of surgery. And then the real work begins for me to help him recover is once I leave the healthcare facility. So that's what I'll share about my experience. And it is my experience, and how I chose to overcome that experience was just to get my son to surgery, and I can deal with it later on.
Yeah, your son's a teenager, for those in the line that don't know that. So he does know his own name, absolutely. And you had to leave him because you just driven 300 kilometers and you had to go to the bathroom and there was no one else with you. So you were not there when his name was called. So she made big assumptions about what was happening in the circumstances as she observed it. So that's unfortunate. I'm so sorry that that happened to you. That's just not right. Yeah, in so many ways. Thanks for sharing that, Cherie. I know it's not easy to share a personal experience like that. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what culturally unsafe care looks like in patient engagement. So when you do a patient engagement, let's say you're doing a document review or something, you need to make sure that when you are introducing Indigenous patients to a group, that you spend time with relationship building and getting to know them. I just talked to a healthcare provider who said, well, we only meet 4 times a year, so we don't have any time for relationship building. And I said, okay, what about relationship building outside of that meeting? Just you introducing yourself to the patients, the Indigenous patients, and introducing the Indigenous patients to each other. And she was like, oh, what a good idea. So she was going to do that. And then also culturally unsafe is to not offer to print out materials. I know a lot of our Indigenous patients like to read the materials in front of them on paper, so they like it to be printed out. So offering to print it out is a culturally safe way of doing that. And then Cherie talked a lot about self-determination, and just, again, she's not the only Indigenous patient I've heard talk about waiting before deciding whether it was an emergency. Was it a 2 out of 10? Because then their child could wait. But if it was a 9 out of 10, they needed to get help. And so just that self-determination. Thanks for explaining that to us, Cherie. That's really super helpful. We'll go to the next slide. Some have asked about what about other demographics? You know, why are we focusing on Indigenous culturally safe care? Right now, we need to focus on Indigenously safe care because of colonization and because of Indigenous people needing to get care, just like what we talked about with Cherie. And as shown in the In Plain Sight document, hopefully you're familiar with that. If you're not, it's in the companion guide. We've linked you to it. We need to start with Indigenous people, and then we can spread to everyone. So here is a map, and you can see the red stars. Back in 2020, we had partnered with First Nations Health Authority with Mark Matthew, and he and I were going to get together with some Indigenous patient partners and talk about the Patient Voices Network in culturally safe care. And so Cherie was one of those patients, and we had recruited another patient from the Kamloops area. And so we spread across the province to all of the different areas because it made sense to have representation from across the province for this small group that got together. Next slide. Because of the pandemic, we were able to meet virtually, and those stars are this Indigenous inclusion group here. And yeah, do you want to say anything about that, Cherie? Go ahead.
Sure. And This was a group that helped me keep going during the pandemic. They helped me significantly when my community shut down and all of our elders stayed indoors and safe. These were my group of community who really stepped it up for me and helped me significantly, along with improving BC healthcare system. At the time, we were focusing on inclusion. And Cathy kept talking about all these Indigenous patient partners of the network. And I asked her, why don't I know who they are? Haven't I met however many people you're talking about? And I've only met 4 or 5 people of the 100 people you're talking about. And Cathy suggested that we have a gathering.
Yeah, so in June of 2020, we got all the northern people together, and you can see the small group that met in the north. But you could just feel the excitement and the empowerment of the patients as they shared about how they're making a difference across Canada and in BC. This is how you engage with Indigenous people in a relational model. We didn't have an agenda. We just got together to meet each other and to hear who each other were and to understand. And so this is the background from the framework that we did to design these documents. And then at our April meeting, we had a second one because this group wanted to meet again. They said, hey, we need to do this. And so Bill had talked about at the Northern meeting for the greater good and how Indigenous people get together for that reason. And so at the April meeting, the goal of the meeting was just relationship building. So we had 33 people gather from across the province virtually. And everybody was like, oh, you're getting Indigenous people together. Can you ask them this? Can you ask them that? Can you ask them this? And I was like, no, we're just going to get to know each other. This is all about relationships. But one of the questions that was asked was, can you ask them about what makes a patient engagement culturally safe? And we were like, yes, that is a good question to really focus on. That would be really smart for us to have that for our next meeting. So at our next meeting, we asked that question. And the thing that Sheila taught me at our provincial relationship meeting, whoever comes are the right people and whatever gets done is the right thing. And I hadn't thought about that concept before, but that's definitely an Indigenous way of being and knowing. So go on to the next slide, please.
And we created an invitation for patient partners, and the aim was Indigenous patient partners will come together and share with each other. And we'll also share with healthcare partners of what matters to us when they are working with healthcare partners in projects to make engagement opportunities more safe, meaningful, and comfortable. And our overall goal was to be equal with each other and to take off our hats and really make this more of an event that was at par with some of the larger provincial events and really give it that level of attention that was needed to have a very, very nice gathering with each other, just to meet each other and encourage each other, because sharing our personal experiences from a lived experience and showing up all of the time, and sometimes and when it's not culturally safe, and most of the time when it is culturally safe, because we have been part of the network for so many years, and so many of us have been part of creating the level of attention that is required. So this all naturally happened from when I joined the network way back in 2010 to the pandemic starting in 2020. And it's just a really nice experience to see the growth and development and to be part of something that really is for the greater good. I'll hand it back to Cathy.
Yeah, so we had set the date for June the 9th, which is International What Matters to You Day. And then we needed to move it out of respect for the Tecumloops Secwepemc and discovery of the 215. So this just shows flexibility and being respectful, which is one of the principles around what's happening in the world, even though you have a gathering planned. So we got guidance from our elders and from First Nations Health Authority. So we set the date for June 17th. We'll go to the next slide.
And through this, we taught at the pre-meeting to the healthcare partners, Indigenous cultural safety and humility is the focus of our work. And I'll hand it over to Cathy to speak more about this slide.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we knew that we wanted the Indigenous patient partners to talk, and we wanted healthcare partners to be there. So we asked them to come as witnesses only. So the Indigenous patient partners had the conversation, but the healthcare partners needed to be part of the conversation. So they witnessed it. And as part of our teaching, I had experienced the UBC Learning Circle with Leslie Bonshore from in Vancouver Coastal Health, and she had shared this document, and I was like, oh, it makes so much more sense now, because people use these words interchangeably, but they're not interchangeable. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is different than Indigenous cultural safety. They do overlap. You can see in the middle part, there's an overlap on anti-racism, but Indigenous cultural safety is separate from diversity and equity and inclusion. They're two different terms, because Indigenous people are special, and it is for Indigenous people about their cultural safety. People, yeah, so that's, I saw the link go in the chat, so you can learn more if you'd like to watch that really well done UBC Learning Circle. So we'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to invite the healthcare partners and the patient partners. And so this is the meeting itself on June the 17th. One rep from each of the healthcare organizations, Ministry of Health, Doctors of BC, BC Cancer, the health authorities, and 13 patient partners were able to attend with the date change. Note takers listened and took notes and wrote down what the Indigenous patient partners said, and each small group had a facilitator and a note taker. So we tell you all of this because we want to teach you about relational engagement, and that's what relational engagement looks like. Those pre-meetings had a chance for the patients to get to know each other, to set it up for this meeting so that we could actually talk about culturally safe engagement. And Tammy suggested that we create documents out of what we had learned. I just want to take a moment to thank the patient partners and the healthcare partners who participated in that lovely discussion and were a part of it. Go ahead, Cherie.
Sure, and this was really nice to be listened to offer some suggestions of how to carry out the gathering, and to really hear the patient voice, everyone's patient voice, and to come at this from an equality where everybody is equal. And we never imagined to create such a lovely document out of this gathering.
Next slide, please, Cynthia. Yeah, so the principles, these are the documents on the right here, the documents that were created, and then these are the principles in order. They do have an order to them. It starts with awareness and understanding and then goes all the way around to listening. And we hired Bert Azak, an Indigenous artist, to help us with this work and to design these documents. And unbeknownst to us, he based each principle on the 7 sacred teachings of the First Nations, and he designed this beautiful artwork to match each principle. So it just really brought the documents to life. So we're really thankful to him. So thank you so much, Bert, for your thoughtfulness behind what you created for us. And we often hear from healthcare partners who want to engage Indigenous patient partners, but they're not sure how. And so that's why these 8 principles that came out help people understand how to do that in such a good, culturally safe way. So 2 resources, one 2-page pamphlet, and then a second 36-page companion guide. And the companion guide goes into greater detail. Do you want to talk about when you might use the documents? Yeah.
Sure. And whenever you're engaging with Indigenous patient partners, it's important to know that these principles are to be utilized. You don't have to use all the principles. You can pick 1 or 2 and just start there. We have many action items from that, and I'll hand it back to Cathy.
Thanks so much. We'll go to the next slide. So Cherie has many famous quotes, but one of the ones that I particularly like is that PVN is one way to affect healthcare change, and anybody can do it. And so as part of my education, Mark Matthews said, hey, Cathy, First Nations Health Authority did a survey, and 88% of Indigenous people consider themselves to be healthy and are healthy. And Cherie said, the healthy people come to the feasts, and we don't see the feasts because we're not participating in them as if we're not on traditional territory. We don't live on traditional lands, so we only see the 12% who are visible. Our elder, Bill Blackwater Jr., assigned us each tasks and said, Cherie, you're our communicator. You're amazing at that. Sheila, you're our matriarch. And Cathy, you're our leader. And this was a message that he gave us right before he passed away. He passed away a week after our gathering. And he talked about how it's really super important for us to continue the conversation. And that's part of why we're continuing the important conversation. I'm going to take us to the documents themselves on the website so that you'll be able to find them. And I know that Cynthia will put a link in the chat for where you can find these beautiful documents. So I'm just going to take us there. So this is the council website. And if you're looking for them, when you go to the BC PSQC, lovely acronym, so that's British Columbia Patient Safety Quality Council.ca. And then you're going to go to Advance the Patient Voice. And then under Advance the Patient Voice, the What Matters to You is where the documents can be found. And so if you scroll down, you can see the documents themselves. The link you're going to get takes you to the blog, which actually talks about the creation of the document. So there's the picture that we used, and then the companion guide and the pamphlet. So this is the pamphlet. This is the 2-pager. I'm just going to see if I can get rid of. I know Cynthia taught me a trick, but I can't remember the trick to get rid of the side panel. So sorry, you'll just have to look at this. There's the 4 principles on the first page here. This is the overview of the principles. And there's the second page. At the bottom, we have a disclaimer that I wanted to read out loud to you because I feel it's very significant. Our circle did include First Nations, Métis, and Inuit participants, and we recognize that these 3 groups have distinct voices. So we encourage you to learn about and consider the individual differences and distinctions that you might have in your work and when you work with these different groups. I'll take you over to the companion guide. So this is the 36-page document. Has a little bit about the council. We acknowledge Bill Blackwater's participation as well as Bert in creating all of the artwork. This is the table of contents, which talks to you about what this document contains. We have the key terms, how to use this resource, key principles in culturally safe engagement, and then we have recommendations and actions. And then we have actually the words of the Indigenous patient partners are in the appendices. This is the quote that we read to you. And these are the patient partners who were a part of this work as they preferred to be listed on the document. And these are the healthcare organizations that were the witnesses. Give you a chance to glance at that. And then I'll just keep scrolling down. Just thought I'd give you an overview to this because it's super helpful as you are going through the document itself to know how to use it. So we've given you definitions and how to use the resource. And then here's the beautiful word that we had with all of the principles. We're just going to talk to you just about key awareness and understanding. It's the first principle. So the key message is at the top. Then we've got the recommendation of what you should do. And then we've actually got the actions. How do you build awareness and understanding? All of these that are highlighted in the pamphlet as well as in this document are hyperlinks. So just so that you know, if you go to anything that's a different color, it is a hyperlink and will take you to the document. So if you're not sure whose land that you're on, or if you wanted to go to the First Nations Health Authority, it starts with me, and make a commitment to cultural safety and humility, you can go to the hyperlinks. So we'll go back to the slideshow now. Go ahead, Cherie.
Yes, and we'll go over the principles in a bit of detail here. The first one features a feather. In First Nations, it symbolizes respect, honor, strength, courage, and wisdom. In Saskatchewan, its feathers also symbolize a step forward. And this is really significant. This is why this is my favorite, because it's a new chapter in the ongoing story of reconciliation. Over to you, Cathy.
Yeah, so this is what I didn't know, right? I had to gain awareness and understanding. I had to learn, and I had to, in my family, it wasn't popular to be Indigenous. And so I had started identifying in 2008, as I mentioned, and I was very unknowledgeable about cultural safety and about Indigenous ways of being and knowing. So I had to start somewhere. And I started with, who am I? And I remember thinking, oh, I've got to introduce myself. And we'll go to the next slide. I should ask Cherie if she can help me with this. So I said, Cherie, I'm doing this introduction. Can I send it to you? Can we talk through it? So tell them what happened when I gave you my introduction. You said, okay, read it out loud.
Yes, Cathy really wanted to email me her introduction, and I said, you can do it right now. If your presentation is in a couple of days, you need to do your introduction to me. Even though I knew a lot about Cathy, I really didn't know what she was going to share, and she has a beautiful introduction, as she did in this presentation today. She learned a lot, and she has different introductions now, focusing just on who she is and bringing that forward, her life experience. And in Indigenous culture, we are taught to really know who you are first and foremost. And that was the biggest takeaway I think that Cathy learned from our gatherings. Everybody introduced themselves to what the host was introducing themselves as. And we had several different gatherings where it was, hi, I'm Cathy, almost engagement leader 4. And then it would be followed up by a patient partner. Hi, I'm Cherie Mercer, just a Patient Voices Network partner. And then we'd start our discussions, go through the agenda to actually learning who people were. And I've gained so many friends, so many colleagues in Patient Voices Network and the Council by just tweaking our introductions. Over to you, Cathy.
Thank you. So you see that you have to do a lot of internal work, and that's the thing. It takes time to understand who you are and the bias that you might bring because of who you are and how you've been raised in your family. That's where we've learned our own bias, and that's what is our family background. And so I challenge you, if you're on the call as a healthcare partner, how can you be a little vulnerable in your introduction, and how can you say something about yourself as an individual, not just your job title? That's what Cherie really taught me, is that we are more than our job title. I know our job title is our safety, and yet we get to know each other. And inevitably, when we do these self-located introductions, we call them, somebody else will have something in common with us. Right, Cherie? I think that happened to you a couple times.
Yes, and I have led many sessions just on self-located introductions with the council and others throughout the province. And it's interesting to see how you change the discussion. You set the tone of almost throwing out your agenda, taking off your professional hat and getting down to earth, grassroots of who you actually are. And many people have so much in common, and it creates a better discussion just by being equal to each other at the onset of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And if you haven't already spent time learning about the land that you're actually living and working on, please do that. And It Starts With Me campaign is really good. I've plugged that a couple times, but it's in the companion guide. You can actually make a commitment to cultural safety and get your colleagues to do the same. That's another step towards truth and reconciliation. And different areas have different protocols. So that's why we bring your attention to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, as well as different nations. It's not all a pan-Indian approach, one size fits all. It's very individual, and learn the protocols of your local area. We'll go on to learning and education. Next slide, please.
Yes, and this one features the beaver, and the beaver carries wisdom. Wisdom is not to be confused with knowledge. Wisdom is the gained experience. Knowledge is the ability to know the difference and accept responsibility and accountability. When one pollutes the water, one does not break a human law, but a law of nature, which states that to poison the water is to destroy oneself. Over to you, Cathy.
So you have to invest time, and you have to learn more about the nation's land that you're on. And so we'll go to the next slide. What we've done in this presentation is we've given you the key message, and then we've also listed out questions you can ask yourself in reflection. That's what these questions are. We will be sending the slides out afterwards, so if you want to spend time with these questions and with the companion guide, these are ways that you can engage deeper into these different principles. So where can you find more information? Well, you can look on websites. All the nations that I'm aware of have nation websites, and you can find more information in that way. And then think about how am I supporting cultural safety? Am I calling out racism at work? What might that look like for me to call it out? And are there other, as you know, there are many other ways to learn about cultural safety. The First Nations Health Authority has a learning series along with the BC Patient Safety and Quality Council. And in plain sight, we've listed the different reports and there are recommendations in those reports. And if you have a way, please, if you're in the healthcare system, to actually do some actions on those recommendations, please consider taking steps towards making changes in the health system. All right, we'll move on to the building relationships slide. Next one, please.
Yes, this one features the turtle and it represents truth and time. His shell has 13 big plates, symbolizing the 13 moons in 1 year. The turtle has been able to adapt to change without changing, thus he represents truth.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us about that one. Talk about it.
Yeah, building relationships takes a lot of time. I remember having conversations with Cathy and she's like, we didn't get through the agenda. And I was like, we totally got through the agenda and exceeded your agenda. We gave you so many gold nuggets. And it took her a lot of time to build a relationship to understand where many of the Indigenous patients were coming from. Even simply foregoing a formality of filling out a form to they're saying, we want to sign up. And Cathy's like, you have to fill out the form first. And she kept coming back and saying, oh, so-and-so wanted to join, but they didn't fill out the form yet. And I was like, phone them up and fill out the form with them on the phone. So something as simple as that to learning about people wanting to be part of the greater good and building the relationships, going to the feasts. Cathy has now gone to several feasts in the north and learned directly from the people who she serves. And I was there to help guide her through the way, and several others were there as well. And she made deep connections where she can probably go to many more feasts in the north. Over to you, Cathy.
I'm glad you told me to bring my own bowl and spoon and cup, Cherie. I would not have had any idea that I needed to do that. And so it was very helpful for me. We'll go to the next slide with the questions about building relationships. Spending time at the start of the meeting is super important. It is, and even with the introductions, because let's think of the power inequity as you're going around and you're, whatever your title is, and then you've got a patient partner. And so when you do have a bit of a personal introduction, the patient partner in you puts you on the same level. And so now it's a lot kinder and more friendly. And that's an aspect of cultural safety. So remember to think about that. Yeah, it's building relationships has been my joy in this work. And, Cherie and my friendship is a benefit from that. And just spending that time with the Indigenous inclusion group, those are my friends as well. And learning from them, we would debrief after the meeting. Cherie and I would get together. That's when I had said to her, hey, we didn't get our agenda done. And she's like, make sure, you don't have a place to rush off to after the meeting. Sometimes we have to stay longer because of the personal items that are being shown. So that's the whole being timed down to the last minute. That's also an unculturally safe thing. And that was something that we've learned. So we'll go on to the next slide. Go ahead, Cherie.
Yes, principle 4 is about preparation, and we all need to prepare for safety. Some of us are not prepared to share our personal experience or talk about it yet, and there's very few platforms for people to be able to share their experiences. So preparing for safety, setting us up for successful engagement in whatever the initiative might be. And there's just different techniques that Cathy has learned over the time, and she'll share those in a minute. And to prepare is featuring the bear. We seek the strength and courage to face our greatest enemy in oneself. Over to you, Cathy.
Yeah, so ahead of time, what do you need to do? Do you need to share terms of reference or key documents to bring people up to speed so that they're ready to participate in the engagement? If in doubt, ask, what do you need before we start? And check in with people before the meeting or after the meeting. It's always helpful to be a friendly person and to ask to help people be prepared. Double check the format you're sending things in. So we'll go on to the next slide. Reciprocity. So patient partners have computers, they have phones, they have iPads, so they're joining technology in different ways. So consider that. We had to spend some significant time teaching, Gigi's teaching the older elders how to use Zoom, and we had to use with the different formats, and I'm sure you've experienced that as well. Or if you're moving to Teams, what, the public isn't using all the technology that we're using in our workplace every day. So consider that. And think about the fact that they may not respond to a doodle poll. I had that recently. Somebody was like, I sent the doodle poll and I didn't get any answer. I said, well, pick up the phone and have a conversation with the dates that you have in mind with the patient partners, just to see what works for them, because they haven't been on their computer. Life is going on. This is a volunteer thing for them. So keeping in mind that, that is important. We'll move on to kindness and empathy. And these teachings that we're sharing with you about the artwork, or the First Nations that Cherie had shared, these are the 7 sacred teachings, and the eagle symbolizes love as a gift. And love is a force that is undeniable. With love, all things are possible. It's everyone's right to have and experience it. So kindness and empathy is very crucial. And so I've had to actually check myself. Where am I on the fine level? Am I feeling kind, or am I below the fine level because somebody's upset me about something? And how do I bring myself back up? What do I need to do to ground myself? How can I check in with myself? Do I need to just get a breath of fresh air? What do I need to do? Because it's so important. And I know that a lot of you are in very high demand jobs where you need to think about this particularly. And I know kindness is your favorite, one of your favorite principles. Cherie, did you want to talk about it a little bit? We can move to the next slide.
Yes, kindness is very important to me. That's what I seek in all initiatives that I take part in. That's what I expect from every healthcare facility that I ever, probably need healthcare services from. And I also need to check myself to see if I'm okay and be grounding. And we've learned this through just dialing it down and being okay with ourselves. Hand it back to you.
Yeah, empathy and kindness, right? Consider where the person's coming from. The admitting clerk, when Cherie went to the hospital, didn't consider Cherie had just driven for 300 kilometers to get there, and of course had to leave her son, who was very sick, by themselves. That person didn't consider that. And I actually asked BC Children's, what did they do that made their admitting person so helpful? And one of my friends there said, we get the admitting person to think about what matters to the patient. And in what matters to the patient, they're coming from that perspective, thinking about, maybe what matters to the patient is finding parking. Or as Cherie mentioned, she needed a wheelchair to get her son into the facility. So different things that you're not thinking about what it took and how long the patient waited before they came to you in the emergency services, or they called the doctor to make an appointment. Those are all really important things to think about. We'll move on to the next one, to respect. And I'll share the teachings. So in respect, the bull symbolizes the importance to respect oneself, and respect will be bestowed on you. So for instance, treat your body with respect and it will look after itself. Treat it with poison and it will destroy itself. So reciprocity is important in your engagements, and thinking about how the patient is being taken care of, because as you see, it's difficult to share their stories because they've had a lot of difficult things happen. So are you acknowledging the lived experience just as much as your education to get your medical degree and the person's lived experience in the system? They know what they're talking about and what they've experienced. Go ahead, Cherie, do you want to add anything onto that one?
I think just bringing forward the lived experience, having the regard that you're focusing on improvement. Some want to share their experience just to get past the experience, and some actually, just want to make an improvement for themselves. And I've been able to do that several times by just respecting in every engagement and opportunity that I've had, and it has had many benefits to focus on respect. Back to you.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions. We do have 2 principles left, so we'll just summarize those last 2 principles. The last 2 are value. So we'll go to the next slide, which gives the questions for respect. Yeah. And then we'll go to value. So value and acknowledging, I sort of touched on that in respect, because acknowledging the lived experience as experience. Those elders, I tell you, they bring you tons of experience as they talk about their life and what they've learned. So valuing the participation of the person. And, you know, I'm just going to do a plug here too. I've heard Indigenous patients talk about how many times they've been asked if they drink alcohol. And this has been someone who doesn't drink alcohol at all being asked 4 times. So valuing the first time they answered the question and not repeating it again, to value and respect the person who's telling you that they don't drink alcohol. Do you want to talk about listening at all, Cherie? Oh, we should share the. I'll share the owl symbolizes truth. I'll share the key message. We must understand, speak, and feel the truth while honoring its power. Truth should not lead us to deceptions. We know who we are in our heart. By knowing that, we also know the truth. Our truth is the value that we add. So I'll let you talk about listening, Cherie.
Okay, that's the next slide.
That's the slide 31. Yeah.
All right, and listening is the final principle that we'll share with you. It has a sense of vulnerability. As I shared before, we don't have opportunities for a platform of sharing. And if you share with your family, they don't necessarily get the gist of it. You know, I wasn't able to share of my experience, which was very small, but in the moment when the nurse wasn't treating me fairly and saying that about my son, I really wanted to walk away and go back home, travel the 300 kilometers back to the safety of my home. But I couldn't do that because my son needed healthcare. And it also provides, you know, listening deeply also provides openness and humility. And you need to come prepared to listen respectfully and actively. And the rest of the principles are in preparation to get you to this point, to deeply listen, actively listen, to understand. And some of it takes debriefing at the end of some of these topics are very, they haven't been vocalized before. So talking about it, even sharing my story through this presentation today, it can be difficult at times. It's very personal, very emotional to me and my son to experience that. And I thank you for listening. And it also helps when, you know, actively doing this principle is to summarize what you think you heard and then talk to the patient afterwards to be closing the loop and asking if you understood that correctly. I do have an opportunity to improve upon my experience at some point, and I know that it will improve, that it was a minor mishap that shouldn't have happened, but it did. And I'm very thankful that I'm able to get to a point where somebody will listen to me. And listening features the wolf. It symbolizes humility, and that's what I was always taught in my culture, is the humility is so important for all people involved. And central to the wolf is the family pack, and it's to ensure the survival, and the pack must be as one. In one's life, much same as the wolf, we need to understand humility. In the wolf pack, each member understands their individual role, and our individual lives, humility becomes the factor, which allows us to ask for guidance humbly. And throughout my volunteer years with the council through Patient Voices Network has paid off for me personally and drastically. I have increased capacity to be able to speak to all of those who are on today, to bring benefits in different ways that never would have been achieved. And I'm not talking about just benefits of understanding and care and improving the care to all Indigenous people. And even just saying for the greater good, why I'm involved. I never imagined that I would be able to speak directly to colleges of physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and for them to deeply understand where I came from, to improve drastic change based on them being witnesses. And that was the most significant initiatives that I took part in. And even if you don't think that you don't have anything to share, just by showing up, we've had several people show up. They weren't ready to share. Even their presence of showing up, eventually they hit the ground running. They took on their own engagements, and I don't feel like I'm the only Indigenous person in the room anymore. There are several people and who are able to be engaged and able to really take the principles of what they were taught in their way of life, which are these principles here today, and actually make a difference. Over to you, Cathy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cherie. That's perfect. We'll go to the last slide. So this slide just summarizes how you can use these documents, and we feel like you can use them in everyday life. We actually did a webinar with the Patient and Public Engagement Learning Series with Tina Miller. So she and I did a webinar that you're welcome to find on the Patient Voices website. And you can use these all over the place. We showed these to First Nations Health Authority. I showed them to Mark Matthew and I said, hey, Mark, do you have anything like this? And he said, yeah, we have these principles because these are Indigenous ways of knowing and being. So we have these around, but we don't have them all in one document like this document. So that's, again, part of why it's so special. These voices came together and just talked about what was important to them. And that was what was important to them. So yeah, thank you so much, Cherie, for your generosity. Thank you for your time, and just it's been awesome to see it's been awesome to get to know you, and I really appreciate you. So thank you.
Yeah, and finally, my parting words are, I just really appreciate this work and the Indigenous patient partners who show up every day, and they created this document together equally. And this document, I don't think we touched on that, Cathy, so maybe you can go over that. Lastly, is where this document, how far has this reached? And this is just the creation of a living document that we anticipated, and we all just wanted this document to actually help. We only imagined it would help in the province of British Columbia, but share with us where it has gone.
Yeah, so it's gone all the way to Australia. We actually had a doctor in BC pass it to a physician in Australia, and he tweeted about it. And so I saw it on Twitter, so it's been all over Twitter. And we are going to be presenting at Quality Forum, which is the council's conference at the beginning of June. I'm going to be presenting with Linda and Lee, two patients who were involved in the creation of it. And then in September, the International Association for Public Participation has accepted our proposal to present, and Christine and I will be presenting in a 3-hour session at that conference. So it's it's going all over the place and very popular, and it's been my privilege to be part of this work and to share my learnings as well about what it's like to be an Indigenous engagement leader.
Yes, and our intention is for this document to be shared, and feel free to download it. Cathy showed you where to find it on the website, and all of the links are in the chat as well, and reach out to Cathy at any time. She's amazing. Thank you.
And over to you, Serene, for some questions.
Yeah, we have quite a few questions here.
Okay.
First question is, would it help to have Indigenous patients, families, and caregivers on the boards of local health authorities?
Do you want to answer that, Cherie? What do you think about having patient voices on the boards?
Sure, maybe you can. I've been involved on several different opportunities with boards, and anywhere that we can get patient voices or Indigenous voices at different levels of government, authorities, it's all the better. However, Cathy, maybe you might go into what an engagement is and how those different authorities or organizations reach out to the Council for Patients, for our voice. And I think on a personal experience, I've been able to affect more change as a patient than I would have as on an individual board level.
Yeah, so if you are interested in engaging with a patient and having them give feedback to your healthcare system or be part of a board, that is something you could approach the Patient Voices Network with. And I'll just put the website in the chat. Patient Voices, sorry, there should be an S on that. Cynthia, can you help me out? Patient Voices BC. .ca. And yeah, thank you very much. That's the right website. And you can go there and you can fill out an engagement request form asking for patients and tell us how many people you need. What is the aim of your engagement? We really want to be specific about that. And then we can help you draft the invitation that goes out to our network of about 1,400 people. And so the people who apply are interested in participating and helping you out.
Our next question had someone in their meeting ask, why do we use the term cultural safety or culturally unsafe as opposed to calling it racism or racist systems in healthcare? They also stated that the term cultural safety can mean keeping our culture safe as opposed to just putting up with racism in healthcare.
Yeah, it's very true. I have had to do my own personal soul searching about where do I have racist tendencies as an individual. And this is not popular, but I do believe that we all have our own worldview of how we look at each other's. And it's not popular to consider yourself a racist. And yet I do believe that we do have blinders about our opinions about other groups of people and our quick judgments that we make. And so racism is blatant, and we know that racism is happening in the healthcare system from in plain sight. And so that's a good question of why we didn't call it racism. I think that we're trying to be more gentle, and yet racism is true in the actions that are happening, whether it's culturally safe or unsafe. Cherie, you want to add on to that?
Sure, and I'll take my personal experience of sharing. And once I was able to share my experience, I brought an elder with me to help me share my experience. And the elder was able to, my son needed an organ surgery, and I kept saying that he had to have his organ removed. And the elder came in and spoke on my behalf and said, this is significant to have this type of surgery, to have this medical emergency need. But I was able to come out of that experience with my cultural identity intact without being poked at in a culturally safe way. And I feel that being able to offer that to Indigenous people, to not try to create anything less, that they can go in there with the self-determination to come out with the same identity as they went in with, or enhanced. And I really feel that some of the engagement, that was my opportunity to bring an elder with me to help me speak on my behalf, because at some points I couldn't get that across to the people that I needed to in that engagement. And it was my choice to bring an elder. And I'm so glad that I did, to speak on my behalf. And those are different opportunities to enhance cultural safety. And I really thank you for the question, because those are hard questions that we have to be able to answer. And as an Indigenous patient, to my the voice of my child is to ensure that we protect the cultural identity of an individual. Thank you.
Yeah, I did a Speak Up talk about racism, and I know in the medical system in Britain, they have anti-racist ambassadors that are in the health system, and I think that this would be super helpful for us to have in Canada, so that if racist care is happening, or if racism is spotted, that you would have an ally or someone who is trained in how to respond. That would be super helpful. They were identified with a button that said, I'm an ambassador for anti-racism. And so I just would encourage that kind of thinking as we move forward in our province to be less racist.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. We have another question. Has Indigenous patient partners engaged with long-term care homes where Indigenous people are living?
Yeah, so the way the health system works with the Patient Voices Network is we as the council don't have any power about what engagements happen and what engagements don't happen. So if you know somebody who works in a long-term care facility that would like to engage Indigenous voices or Indigenous families about long-term care, that's how it's set up. It's not set up for the patients to say, hey, long-term care needs help in racism, and so someone needs to do something. And that's because it needs a champion that can actually affect change. So someone from a long-term care facility would have to be able to actually affect change in their facility based on what the feedback that was given to them by the family. So that's the reason why the system is set up that way, but not that I'm aware of has any work been done on Indigenous racism in long-term care. I'm not aware of any.
Our next question is, they first say, these are wonderful resources. Have they also been shared with the BC health regulators? They said they need to inform and engage all the registered health professionals in this conversation.
Yeah, you're touching on something that was a concern of our artist, Bert, and other patients who had been part of the work, that they didn't want this work to sit on the shelf. You know, we had gotten together and given our opinions about cultural safety, so now what? And I can tell you that there has been, as you've heard about the different conferences that we've been able to present at, we presented at a Northern Health Quality and Research Conference in December. That was with Dwayne. And then we've done the patient engagement learning series. So we have not particularly shared it with regulators, but if you know regulators that you can send these documents to and bring it to their attention, or if you want to send a recording, or if there's a way, that's why we're depending on all of you to help us share these documents. We need your help in spreading the documents, because only through your spread will people have it brought to their attention. But I do agree that that is an important group that needs awareness. I was talking to my CEO, Christina Kraus, this morning about the In Plain Sight Task Force and their work and the importance of these principles even in their work, because I do believe that the beauty of these principles is that it can be used in everyday being. And one of the patient partners, I'll just talk about her for a moment, told me she brought it to the Ministry of Child and Families and was talking to them about, hey, I don't think you understand when you're not being culturally safe, and this document will totally help you. So she brought it there. So this document can be used all over the place in different places to help with the conversation about what does culturally safe care look like.
Our next question is, do you think that there is a need for more local learning, language, history, protocols of the local people?
I am familiar with locally that actually, I'll tell you another little story. One of the physician organizations came to me and said, Cathy, we want to hire an Indigenous person who's going to teach us all about being Indigenous. And I said, well, considering the fact that there are 37 different communities around this local area that access your hospital, I'm not sure that one person will be the only person who will need to help educate you. You will need to have education from the different nations, because as we mentioned, it's not a one size fits all. Different protocols happen in different nations. And so it's really important to understand the different nation and the individual and what nation they're from. And I did want to mention that too, that when you are wanting to engage and have a conversation with an Indigenous person, a wonderful question to ask is, hey, what nation are you from? And I didn't know that, because many Indigenous people are so proud of their nation. They love to tell you about what nation they're from, and that's just a really great conversation starter if you're looking for a way to engage. Cherie, did you want to answer that question about local nations and protocols at all? Do you have anything to add?
I think that's great, and I really appreciate the question, so we'll move on.
Our next question is similar to the other one. Where can we learn more about self-located introductions?
Yeah, where can you learn more about self-located introductions? I think in the document we've talked about self-located introductions. Cherie is an expert on self-located introductions and has led different facilitation groups about that. And when you think about self-located introductions, the thing that I've learned about it is it's what is your family background? And then what is something that you are personally a part of. Like I talked about empowering people with their strengths, that was important to me. And then where are you currently living? And that whole meaningful land introduction, not just I'm on this land, but how can you make it more meaningful and talk about the people who live on the land that you're living on? Cherie, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, thank you for the question. And it is very important that individuals learn about self-located introductions, no matter where they are and what kind of background that they have. Especially for myself, I learned more about myself by teaching others about self-located introductions, and I do offer the course alongside coworkers and alongside Cathy as well. So it is a webinar in itself and a workshop, and we do teach different variations of self-located introductions. It's very beneficial to know. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Our next question is, would there be a way to engage with the pharmacists to help disseminate information and reach more communities, as they may be closer than some larger healthcare centers? BC College physicians, not physicians, pharmacists could be a willing partner.
Absolutely. As the council, we work with all health organizations that are not for profit. So that is who we work with. We would love to work with the BC pharmacists and help you engage with Indigenous voices and figure out how to do that in a good way. So we would welcome any opportunity to affect engagement and to affect practice based on learnings. One of the things that I'm super pleased in and empowering others is bringing a different patient to each one of these talks. Like I mentioned, so these are all the 13 who were part of the talk coming and talking about the principles in their creation. And so we would be happy to do a presentation if somebody was interested in that, or if they wanted to engage the public. Cherie, I see you taking yourself off mute.
Sure, and I've just by chance had an opportunity in a small group setting with one of the people from the College of Pharmacists of BC, and he was sharing amazing work that they're doing there, and it was so nice to hear the level that they're operating at to try assist where they can, and it was a really nice approach, and I was really inspired by the work that they're doing. And part of the engagement is you'll never know what kind of opportunities are available. Every week, the council sends us opportunities that we can engage in. And just looking at this week, we have some of the engagements they're so interesting. You can be part of the Victoria Primary Care Network Steering Committee. Another one is the Lower Limb Amputee Clinical Practice Standard Development Team. And I've never heard of any of these engagements before. So it's quite possible that different organizations such as the pharmacists will try to engage in these types of engagements, or they will be alongside some of these engagements because pharmacists are everywhere. And there is an opportunity for long-term care resident experience survey from the development of Fraser Health as well. That was a question asked earlier. And then from the new Surrey Hospital and BC Cancer Centre, there's an opportunity to be part of to be a member and patient and family advisory council. So these are some of the types of engagements that Indigenous people can be a part of, and their voice will be heard at these levels. There are several other engagements, and they change every week. I just wanted to put that pitch in there.
Thanks, Cherie, for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question is BC College of Nurses and Midwives and College Physicians recently signed off on the culturally safe standard. Does this standard adequately address the principles you have shared here?
So I know that there was a small group of Indigenous patients that talked to the principals each day, and I believe with my whole heart that Indigenous ways of being and knowing are in these standards, the standards that have been created, because as I mentioned, the facilitator told me how those patients significantly impacted the direction that the standards were going based on what they had come up with when they had the lived experience of the Indigenous patient partners on top, and how the eyes were opened about Indigenous culturally safe care and running the gauntlet, like what Cherie mentioned. Their eyes were opened about every interaction is an opportunity for racist care. And so that's the struggle that an Indigenous patient feels when they go, because you don't just talk to one person when you go for healthcare services. You talk to 5 different people, the blood lab tech, the x-ray tech, and so each interaction is an opportunity for culturally unsafe care. And so I believe from what I have heard about those standards that were created, that definitely these principles have affected them. I don't know, Cherie, if you want to add, because you were actually at the engagement itself, if you have anything to add to that.
I think it's a great step in the right direction. And I know that there were Indigenous voices at the table when these standards were being created or being enhanced, actually. They were really being enhanced. And I feel that when you have Indigenous people at the table and their voice is bringing their voice forward, it really enhances and encompasses the principles that we shared today. And although they may not be able to spell it out, these are behind the scenes happening. And I'll leave it there. Thank you for the question, though. That was great.
Our next question is, has the engagement framework been reflected back more broadly or to other Indigenous people?
Yeah, so we do want to stress this was one point in time that this was created, and that we did invite whoever wanted to attend to be there that could attend that day. So we actually, when we took the notes, we themed them into principles, and then we sent them back to the Indigenous patient partners who had been a part of it and said, hey, is this what you said? Because that's a really important part of authentic engagement, to double check that you've documented what you think you've documented. And then we added the actions. Then we said, hey, do you think these actions, because those were from my lived experience, do you think these actions would be ways for people to learn about how to do these principles? And they said, yeah, these are good actions to help people move forward. So we haven't planned to do any more engagement to the broader Indigenous voices about cultural safety. And again, this is one point in time, and these are 13 people's perspectives. So it's not the be all and end all document, but it is a step towards helping both sides understand cultural safety. And that's what I think has been really challenging, because it's been so mysterious to understand what does the cultural safety look like. So.
Yeah, and maybe we can ask you, how many Indigenous patient partners do we have in the network, Cathy? And then that'll help us bring these documents to life, because I am from the Nisga'a Nation, and the documents I help share within my nation, and I encourage patient partners from my nation to sign up with Patient Voices Network, and then have engagements throughout the council to bring these documents to life and to be champions and to bring them forward. And that would be an interesting question to answer right now.
Yeah, that would be an interesting question to answer. So we do have 200 different Indigenous patient partners who are part of the Patient Voices Network, and that's from across the province. It's not just in the north, it's all across the province, on Vancouver Island, in Vancouver, in the interior, in the north, and Vancouver Coastal. So just so that you know, it's all across the province. And these patients are willing to give their time to talk about healthcare, which always blows my mind that these people are generous enough to volunteer and to give feedback to the system. And I'm part of, I have the privilege of being in a learning experience at Nicola Valley Institute, and the Indigenous patients, the Indigenous public that I'm attending this with, they're also very passionate about the principles, and they're like, I'm going to take these and I'm going to use them for this or that. They're talking about using them with their nations. So there's definite uptake because of the principles being really good things of ways of being and knowing in human interactions and being human. I'll just put that plug in for being human. That's really what's important here. And that's part of what we're trying to get across, is to be human, to consider reciprocity, to take the time to learn about yourself and think about your own bias and catch yourself if you're being culturally unsafe. I'll give another example where I was being culturally unsafe. I was doing a presentation for First Nations Health Authority, and I used an example of a patient engagement about residential school. And I wasn't thinking about how residential school, just mentioning it, can be triggering because of the difficult experiences that Indigenous people have had with residential school. So I had to apologize, and I had to just say, hey, and so if you do find yourself misstepping, please apologize and please learn from your mistake and don't do it again. And I will not do that again. So again, that's how the learning happens.
Our next question, will all hospitals be directed to create a separate space for Indigenous persons to practice their spiritual ways?
Yeah, that's definitely in the recommendations that have been made. And I know that that has been set as a requirement. And I know that hospitals are struggling to do that. So I am not accountable for that, but I do know that that is an expectation that has been put out there. And I will put a plug in for, please try to do this right if you're building a hospital, and consider the local Indigenous ways of being and knowing, and the spirituality and the place for space that's necessary at a hospital as part of truth and reconciliation for Indigenous voices.
And that was our last question.
Awesome. And I'll just add to that, because this is near and dear to my heart, because we have a hospital that is being constructed today and going up in the north here. And it takes everyone. I'm involved at a different level for the new hospital build, and it is a call to action, actually, in the In Plain Sight report for new hospitals to contain this area. And I really thank you for bringing forward the question. It takes everyone to bring forward the call to action. It may seem simple to put this into action, but actually it takes a lot of us, all nations, for this understanding, no matter if they're from this province or the local area. Any new hospital, there's a call to action to include this space for all Indigenous people who may use it. And it is very important. We all know the importance of including a space like this. And I just encourage you to reach out and voice your opinion on the matter to any level of government, to the hospital boards and the powers that be. And even if you were to write or say anything about the matter, it does help. I know that it will help. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment just to say thank you. Thank you, Cherie, for that. And I know that is very near and dear to your heart as you're part of that work. So thank you for, again, being part of that work. Thank you to the patient partners who are on the call. I've seen some of you engage in the chat box, and I know that some of you were actually part of creating these documents, and I raise my hands to you and say thank you. Thank you for the healthcare organizations who are part of this work. And right now, I just also wanted to mention that the council is still doing work on these documents on how to spread them. So we are making a strategy on how to spread the documents, and we are working with healthcare organizations on how to do that in a good way. And we do have Indigenous patient partners who are part of the creation of the document. Victoria and Cindy are working on that as well. So just that these documents, please help us have the documents not sit on the shelf by sharing them far and broadly and widely. And I also want to raise my hands to Bill Blackwater Jr.'s family and to just say thank you for sharing him with us. We miss him and we appreciate his contributions and his legacy that he has left in us as we move the work forward. Thank you so much for UBC Learning Circle for allowing us to have this time. We appreciate it. Masicho.